The phone felt cold in my hand, but my resolve was solid as steel. I scrolled right past my son's name and dialed the number for David Chen, the best litigation attorney in the state. Most fathers dream of getting a call from their son after his wedding. I got an invoice. A week after discovering on social media that my only child, Leo, had gotten married in Hawaii without me, a thick envelope arrived. Inside was a professionally printed bill for $82, 457.19. The note attached was the coldest part. "Dad, we know you always wanted to give me the best start in life." He was right. I did. What he conveniently forgot was that I already had. He thought he was cashing in on a father's love, but he was about to learn he was defaulting on a business debt. This isn't just a story about a father's broken heart. It's the story of how my son's invoice for a wedding I never attended became the receipt for his downfall. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments. For 20 years, my world has been framed by the four walls of my garage workshop. It's a place I built myself, board by board, nail by nail, right after my wife Sarah passed away. The air in there hangs thick with the clean, sharp scent of cedar and pine, a smell I've come to associate with peace. The low hum of the table saw is more familiar to me than my own heartbeat. Every morning, I'd start my day out there, a steaming mug of black coffee resting on my workbench, its warmth a small comfort against the cool morning air. This workshop wasn't just a hobby. It was how I put food on the table, how I paid for every school trip, every pair of sneakers, and eventually, every textbook for Leo's business degree. My hands, calloused and stained from wood varnish, are a testament to that life. They're a map of my love for him. The house itself is a quiet keeper of memories. It's a simple two-story place, nothing fancy, but it's where we built our life. In the living room, there's a worn leather armchair. Its deep burgundy color faded to a soft brown in the places where the sun hits it in the afternoon. That was Sarah's chair. I can still close my eyes and see her curled up in it, a book in her lap, her feet tucked underneath her. Sometimes, if I sit in it and the house is completely silent, I can almost catch the faint scent of her lavender perfume, a ghost of a fragrance that has somehow clung to the leather all these years. After she was gone, I never had the heart to move it. It became my spot, a place where I felt connected to her, to the life we shared, to the family we were. Our story is written on the walls of this house. On the kitchen doorframe, a series of pencil marks charts Leo's growth, starting from a tiny line near the floor labeled Leo, age 3, and climbing steadily upward until the final mark, well above my own head, simply says, Leo, 18, off to college. I remember lifting him up so he could make that first mark himself, his small hand guided by mine, his laughter echoing in the small kitchen. I'd run my fingers over those faded graphite lines whenever I missed him, tracing the journey from a little boy who believed his dad could fix anything to a young man who was ready to take on the world. I believed I had given him the tools to do just that. I gave him everything I had, and sometimes more than I had. I remember the summer of 2012 with perfect clarity. Leo had just been accepted into his dream university, but the tuition was staggering. That same summer, I had finally finished restoring my 1969 Ford Mustang. It was my one selfish passion, a cherry red beauty with a V8 engine that rumbled like distant thunder. I'd spent a decade on that car, sourcing original parts, spending weekends covered in grease and oil. It was a masterpiece. Leo knew how much it meant to me. But when I saw the acceptance letter in his hand, his eyes shining with a mix of excitement and worry, there was no choice to be made. I sold the Mustang 2 weeks later for $45,000. I didn't even haggle. The look on Leo's face when I handed him the cashier's check was all the payment I needed. "I'll pay you back, Dad. Every single cent, I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just clapped him on the shoulder and said, "This isn't a loan, son. It's an investment." In the years that followed, our phone calls were my lifeline. He'd call every Sunday, telling me about his classes, his friends, and later, the software company he was starting. I felt a surge of pride every time he mentioned a new client or a successful project. I had invested well. My son was a success. The calls became a little shorter, a little less frequent after he met Chloe. I understood. He was building his own life, his own future. I told myself it was natural. I imagined them picking out a ring, planning a future, and I pictured myself standing beside him, just as I had always been. I'd sit in Sarah's armchair, the phone pressed to my ear, and listen to him talk about his bright future, never once imagining that in his vision of that future, there was no longer a place for me. The first sign that something was wrong came subtly, not like a crack of thunder, but like a slow, creeping frost. The Sunday phone calls, once a ritual, started to change. They grew shorter. The easy flow of conversation, where we'd talk about everything from my latest woodworking project to the old dog next door, became strained. Leo's voice was different, more clipped, efficient, like he was conducting a business meeting he needed to wrap up. It was after he met Chloe that the chill truly set in. I first heard her voice in the background of one of those calls, a sharp, crystalline sound that cut through the line. "Is that your dad again, Leo? Tell him you're busy. We have reservations at 8. Leo coughed, a little flustered. "Gotta go, Dad. Big meeting. Talk soon." The line went dead. I stood there in my quiet kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, the pencil marks on the doorframe seeming to mock me. He was never too busy for me before. A few months later, they invited me to see their new apartment downtown. The drive itself felt like crossing into another country. I left my world of sawdust and quiet streets for the gleaming steel and glass of the city. Their building had a doorman and an elevator that whisked you upward without a sound. When Leo opened the door, the difference was jarring. Their apartment was a sea of white walls, chrome fixtures, and black leather furniture. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom, a place where people didn't live so much as perform. There were no photographs on the walls, no scuff marks on the floor, none of the comfortable clutter that makes a house a home. It was sterile and cold, smelling faintly of expensive air freshener and money. Chloe greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was beautiful, dressed in a sleek black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "So you're the famous woodworker," she said, her tone making it sound more like an accusation than a compliment. She guided me to a low-slung sofa that felt like sitting on a block of ice. They offered me a drink, something in a heavy crystal tumbler that I was afraid to set down on their glass coffee table. The conversation was all about them, their recent trip to Aspen, the IPO they were planning for Leo's company, the new round of funding they'd secured for $1.5 million. I listened, nodding along, feeling like a visitor from another planet. My hands, with their calluses and faint smell of wood stain, felt clumsy and out of place holding that perfect, cold glass. The conversation eventually turned to my house. "Leo tells me you're still in the old family place," Chloe said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "It must be so big for just one person." I felt a protective instinct rise in me. "It's my home," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "It's full of memories." Leo shifted uncomfortably. "What Chloe means, Dad, is that it's a major asset. The property values in that neighborhood have shot up. We ran the numbers. You're sitting on at least $750,000. I stared at him, my coffee forgotten on the table. He wasn't talking about the kitchen where his mother taught him to bake cookies or the backyard where I taught him to throw a baseball. He was talking about it like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. He didn't see a home, he saw a number. "The business is my focus now, Dad," he continued, leaning forward. "Every bit of capital counts. You remember that $45,000 from the Mustang? That was seed money. To get to the next level, we need to think bigger." I looked at my son, at the expensive watch on his wrist and the stranger sitting beside him, and I felt a chasm opening between us. This wasn't the boy who promised to pay me back. This was a man who saw my life's work, my home, my very history, as capital to be liquidated for his next venture. I drove home that night with a hollow feeling in my chest. I parked the truck, walked into my quiet house, and went straight to Sarah's old leather armchair. I sank into it, the worn leather creaking a familiar welcome. The scent of lavender was gone. Or maybe, for the first time, I just couldn't smell it anymore. All I could feel was the cold. The silence in my house was a living thing for the next few days. It settled in the corners and clung to the furniture, thick and heavy like the dust in an abandoned room. I'd walk from the workshop to the kitchen and back again, the cream-colored invoice for $82, $457.19 always in my hand, as if its weight could somehow make the situation feel real. The numbers were burned into my memory, a cold, hard litany of my own irrelevance. I'd sit in Sarah's armchair, the leather cool against my skin, and stare at the phone on the side table, waiting for it to ring. I knew it would. An invoice this large always comes with a follow-up call. I just didn't know how much more they could possibly take from me. The phone finally rang on a Thursday afternoon, its shrill sound cutting through the quiet like a shard of glass. The screen lit up with his name, Leo. I let it ring 3 times before I answered, my throat tight. "Hello, Leo," I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Dad!" "Hey, just checking in. How are things?" he asked, his tone breezy and casual, like a man asking about the weather. It was the voice he used with his investors, polished and devoid of any real warmth. "I'm here," I replied, unwilling to give him anything more. There was a brief, awkward pause. "So," he continued, clearing his throat, "did you get the package we sent over, from the wedding planners?" "You mean the bill?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Yes, I got the bill." "Great, great," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Look, I know that number probably looks a little shocking at first glance, but Chloe and I believe in full transparency. Her parents covered their share, for the things on their side. We felt it was only fair to give you the opportunity to contribute to our foundation. It's an investment, Dad. Just like college. It's for our future." He was using business terms, transparency, opportunity, investment, to describe filial extortion. I stayed silent, letting his words hang in the air between us, their ugliness exposed. His discomfort grew in my silence. "Dad, you still there?" In the background, I heard Chloe's sharp voice, muffled but clear. "Leo, for God's sake, just get to the point. Ask him when we can expect the payment. My father's accountant needs to close the books on the event by the 15th. Leo's voice came back on the line, firmer now, prodded into action. "So we'll need the funds transferred by the 15th of next month. That gives you a little over 3 weeks. Should be plenty of time." The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. "And how do you expect me to produce over $80,000 in 3 weeks, Leo?" He sighed, a sound of practiced patience, as if I were a difficult employee and not the man who taught him how to ride a bike. "Well, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. We were being proactive and had a chat with a top real estate agent in your area. The market is incredible right now. He said he could have the house listed by Monday. With the equity you're sitting on, you could cover the wedding costs, buy a fantastic condo downtown near us, and still have a few $100,000 left over. It's a clean slate, Dad. A win-win." I closed my eyes. He wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for my home, for Sarah's chair, for the pencil marks on the doorframe. He was asking me to liquidate my entire life so he could close the books on a party. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "Honestly, Dad," he said, his voice dropping into a confidential, almost pitying tone, "it was probably for the best you weren't there. It was a certain kind of event. Chloe's family, my investors. It was very high-level networking. You would have been uncomfortable. We really spared you the awkwardness." And there it was. The final cut. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the invitation. It was about them deciding I was no longer fit to be seen in their new shiny world. The world I had funded. The world built with the grease-stained money from a 1969 Mustang. A strange and terrible calm washed over me. The pain in my chest didn't vanish, but it cooled and hardened into something else. Something solid. Something I could use. "I see," I said, and my voice was so steady it surprised me. "Thank you for clarifying your position, Leo." "So, we're good for the 15th? You'll talk to the realtor?" he asked, sensing victory. "I'll handle my finances," I said slowly and deliberately. "You just worry about yours." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I placed the receiver back on its cradle with a quiet click. I stood up and walked over to my old roll-top desk, the one I'd built myself 30 years ago. I pulled out the 2 documents, the partnership agreement that made me a 40% owner of his company, and the invoice for his wedding. I laid them side by side. One was a promise he had broken. The other was a demand he had no right to make. He thought he was closing the books on an event. He had no idea he had just opened the books on his entire life. For a long time after I hung up, I just sat there at my desk, the silence of the house settling around me like a heavy blanket. There was no rage, No shouting into the empty rooms. No punching the wall until my knuckles bled. The searing pain in my chest had cooled, solidifying into a block of ice. It was a strange feeling, this utter lack of heat. It was clarity. My son had looked at my life, the home I built with his mother, the sacrifices I'd made, the very memories that defined me, and had reduced it all to a number on a spreadsheet, $750,000. Then he'd sent me an invoice for his own happiness, payable by the 15th. He had made it a business transaction. So a business transaction it would be. My gaze fell upon the two documents lying side by side under the warm glow of my desk lamp. The cream-colored invoice for $82, $457.19, and the faded, legally binding partnership agreement. One was a demand based on entitlement, the other was a contract based on a promise. For years I had been the silent partner, the quiet, unseen foundation of his success. I had been Dad, the emotional support system, the emergency fund, the man who sold his dreams so his son could build his own. They saw me as a relic from a past they had outgrown. A simple, sentimental old man who worked with his hands, who would be easily confused by their fast-paced world of IPOs and high-level networking. They assumed I would grieve, maybe argue, and then, eventually, I would fold. They would not see this coming. I ran a hand over the smooth, worn oak of the desk I had built the year Leo was born. My calloused fingers traced the grain, a familiar comfort. This desk, this house, this life. It wasn't just an asset to be liquidated. It was the legacy of a promise I made to his mother. I would protect it. I picked up the partnership agreement, its legal jargon suddenly as clear as day. 40%. It was all there in black and white, signed in 2012 by a younger, more hopeful version of myself, and by a son whose signature was still full of youthful ambition. He had told me the profits were always being reinvested. I had never questioned it. I had trusted him. That trust was now the single greatest advantage I had. He had no idea I would ever think to look at this document again. He had forgotten who owned the ground his glass castle was built on. My son wanted to close the books on his wedding. I was about to open the books on his entire company. The next morning, the sun cut through the workshop window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, silent witnesses. The scent of cedar was sharp and clean. But for the first time in years, it wasn't a smell of comfort. It was the smell of focus. I didn't pick up my tools. Instead, I walked back into the house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and sat at my old oak desk. The invoice and the partnership agreement were still there, lying exactly where I had left them. They were no longer just pieces of paper. They were a map. My son had drawn the battlefield. I was just choosing the weapons. At precisely 9:01 a.m., I dialed the number for David Chen. His office was on the 34th floor of a steel and glass tower downtown, a world away from my workshop. I had put on my best shirt, the one I saved for holidays, but I still felt the sawdust on me, a permanent part of my skin. Mr. Chen was a man who seemed to be carved from the same sharp angles as the building he worked in. He didn't waste time with small talk. He listened, his eyes fixed on me, his hands steepled on a desk that was completely bare except for a single, pristine legal pad. I laid out the story, my voice even, and low. I told him about the Mustang, the second mortgage I took out on my home on June 12, 2011, for $150,000, which became the seed money for Innovate Software, LLC. I slid the partnership agreement across the polished mahogany surface. Then, I placed the wedding invoice next to it. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze shifting between the two documents. Finally, he looked up at me. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice calm and precise, "your son has made a grave miscalculation. This isn't a family dispute. This is a breach of fiduciary duty." He explained the retainer, $10,000, billed against his rate of $650 per hour. I didn't flinch. I wrote the check right there, my signature firm and steady. My first assignment was to gather every piece of financial correspondence I had. For the next 3 days, my house was not a home but an archive. I unearthed a decade of my life from old filing cabinets and dusty boxes in the attic. I found the original loan documents for the second mortgage, file number 201104582. I printed out bank statements from July 2011, showing the wire transfer of $150,000 to Leo's newly opened business account. I even found a handful of early emails from Leo, sent from his old university address, where he gushed with gratitude. One, dated August 3, 2012, read, "Dad, I can't believe it. The first server is up and running. None of this would be possible without you. You're not just my dad, you're my partner in this." I printed every single one, the black ink a stark testament to a promise long since forgotten. I compiled it all into a neat, 3-inch thick binder and delivered it to Mr. Chen's office on Monday morning. The first official move was made on Wednesday, October 2nd. Mr. Chen sent a letter via certified mail to the corporate headquarters of Innovate Software, LLC. It wasn't an angry letter. It was far colder and more dangerous than that. It was a formal demand for inspection of corporate records, citing the relevant State Corporate Code, Section 1601. It requested full access to all financial statements, balance sheets, profit and loss statements, and shareholder meeting minutes from the company's inception to the present day. The letter gave them a legally mandated deadline of 10 business days to comply. As I stood in my workshop that evening, the low hum of the lathe filling the silence, I felt a shift. The feeling of being a victim, of being erased, was gone. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was a 40% owner of a multi-million-dollar company, and I was simply asking to see the books. Just as Mr. Chen had predicted, my son called. It was the following Tuesday, the 8th of October. He didn't sound breezy this time. There was a hard, irritated edge to his voice. "Dad, I just got a very strange letter from some lawyer." "David Chen? What is this?" I was sanding a piece of maple, the wood smooth as silk under my fingers. I didn't stop. "That's my attorney, Leo." "Your attorney?" he scoffed, the sound tinny through the phone. "What do you need an attorney for?" "Dad, this is ridiculous. Just talk to the realtor. We need to get the house listed if you're going to make the payment by the 15th. I switched off the sander. The sudden silence was heavy. "The house is not for sale, Leo, and I won't be making any payment." There was a stunned pause. I could hear Chloe whispering furiously in the background. Leo's voice came back, laced with a venom I had never heard before. "What are you trying to pull? After everything I've done, the success I've built? You're going to try to mess with my business over this? You have no idea what you're doing, old man." "On the contrary, son," I said, my voice as calm and solid as the oak bench beneath me. "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing. I suggest you have your lawyer read my lawyer's letter very carefully. The clock is ticking." I hung up. I placed the phone back on the workbench, picked up the piece of maple, and felt its perfect, unblemished surface. I was no longer just fixing things. I was building something new. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. The 10 business days that followed felt like the quiet before a storm. The air in my house was still, but it was a charged stillness, thick with anticipation. I spent my time in the workshop, not building but maintaining. I sharpened every blade on my table saw, oiled every hinge on my cabinets, and organized every screw and nail into its proper bin. It was methodical work, repetitive and calming. Each turn of the screwdriver, each sweep of the oil rag, was a small act of control in a life that had been thrown into chaos. I didn't hear from Leo. I didn't expect to. His arrogance wouldn't allow him to believe I was serious. He and Chloe were probably laughing about it over a $200 dinner, dismissing my lawyer's letter as the confused ramblings of an old man. They were about to learn that silence in my world wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign that I was measuring twice before I made my final cut. The deadline, October 16th, came and went without a single page of documentation arriving. At 9 a.m. on October 17th, my phone rang. It was David Chen. "As expected, Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice crisp and devoid of surprise. "They've ignored the formal request. They're calling our bluff." I could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. "I'm filing a motion to compel with the Superior Court this morning. Case number will be CV202300915. They will be served by the end of the day. They no longer have a choice. A judge will now be ordering them to produce the records." I thanked him and hung up. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe. I remembered Leo at age 10, proudly marking his new height. He'd always wanted to be bigger, to be seen as important. Now, he was about to get his wish. He was going to be the star of his very own court case. 2 days later, a courier delivered 4 large bankers' boxes to my doorstep. There was no note, no apology for the delay. Just 4 boxes, carelessly taped shut. I brought them into the living room and opened the first one. It was exactly what Mr. Chen had warned me to expect. A document dump. Thousands of pages of unsorted receipts, old invoices and printouts, all mixed together in no discernible order. A receipt for a $4 coffee was paperclipped to a $10,000 server maintenance contract. It was a deliberate attempt to bury us in useless information, to make the task so daunting that we would simply give up. I spent the entire weekend on the floor of my living room, surrounded by a sea of paper, a pot of black coffee at my side. I sorted every single slip, creating neat piles: utilities, payroll, office supplies, travel, and entertainment. By Sunday night, my back ached and my eyes burned, but I had a system. And deep in the third box, buried between catering receipts for office lunches, I found it. A credit card statement from March. The company card. And on it, a charge for $12,000 to Chantel's Bridal Boutique, and another for $25,000 to the Mauna Lani Resort, Hawaii. The same numbers from his wedding invoice. It wasn't just an invoice he'd sent me, it was a receipt for fraud. My hands were steady as I scanned the documents and emailed them to Mr. Chen with the subject line, T&E. His reply came less than 5 minutes later. This is it. They've commingled funds to a criminal degree. I'm bringing in a forensic accountant. Her name is Ms. Albright. She eats people like your son for breakfast. The next phase of the plan was set in motion. Ms. Albright was a small, sharp woman with eyes that didn't miss a thing. She worked out of a sterile office that smelled of paper and efficiency. I handed her my organized files. She took one look at the credit card statement, then at me, and a thin, professional smile touched her lips. This will be straightforward, she said. Give me 1 week. Leo called that Friday night. The anger was gone from his voice, replaced by something I had never heard from him before, a tremor of fear. Dad, what are you doing? The lawyers are talking about a forensic audit. This could kill the company. This could kill everything I've built. I was sitting in Sarah's old armchair, the worn leather a familiar comfort. You built it with my money, Leo, I said quietly. I'm just trying to see what my investment has become. It's become a success, he yelled, his voice cracking. We're about to go public. Do you know what that means? I know what 40% of it means, I replied. I heard Chloe snatch the phone. Listen to me, you bitter old man, she hissed, her voice like ice. You are going to ruin us. We will lose everything because you couldn't just write a check and stay out of the way. This is our life. You should have thought of that, I said, my voice as cold as hers, before you sent me the bill for it. I hung up the phone and looked around the quiet living room. The house didn't feel empty. It felt solid, grounded. It was my life, and I was taking it back. Exactly 1 week later, I was back in Ms. Albright's office. A 54-page report sat on the conference table between us. The cover page read, Preliminary Findings, Innovate Software, LLC. She slid it towards me. Mr. Peterson, she began, in my 15 years of practice, I have rarely seen such blatant disregard for corporate structure. Your son and his wife weren't just commingling funds, they were using the company as a personal piggy bank. The numbers were staggering. Over the last 3 years, she had identified $582, in personal expenses funneled through the business. The list was sickeningly detailed. A down payment of $75,000 on their downtown condo, listed as office expansion, 2 leased luxury cars, a Porsche 911 for him and a Maserati for her, totaling $3,850 per month, categorized under company vehicles. There were monthly payments of $2,200 to a designer clothing subscription service for Chloe, labeled Uniform and Dress Code. Vacations to Italy, Greece, and Bali, costing over $90,000, all disguised as international client development. And then there was the wedding. Every single item from the invoice he'd sent me, from the flowers to the photographer, had been paid for with the company credit card and written off as a, quote, retreat and shareholder event. The total cost, she had discovered, wasn't $82, 457.19. It was $114, 600. They hadn't just sent me a bill, they had tried to profit off me. I closed the report. The room was silent. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness for the boy I had raised, the boy who had gotten so lost somewhere along the way. Ms. Albright looked at me with something like sympathy. "With this evidence," she said gently, "the judge won't just grant the motion to compel. He'll likely appoint a receiver to take control of the company's finances immediately to prevent further fraud." Mr. Chen, who had been sitting quietly beside me, spoke up. "The hearing is set for November 12th at 10 a.m. I've already had subpoenas issued. Leo and Chloe will both be required to testify under oath." I nodded slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. He thought he had spared me the awkwardness of his high-level networking event. Now we were all going to a much more exclusive gathering. It was called a court hearing, and this time, I was most definitely on the guest list. The subpoenas landed on a Monday. The news came from Mr. Chen, who informed me with his usual dispassionate efficiency that the process server had delivered them personally to Leo and Chloe at their downtown office. The storm had finally broken. I imagined the crisp, white envelopes in their hands, legal documents that felt heavier than their weight in paper, a formal invitation to the life they had tried so hard to hide. For the next 2 days there was nothing but a profound silence. I spent that time in my workshop, the scent of fresh-cut oak filling the air. I was building a small bookshelf, a simple project. The precise measurements, the smooth glide of the plane over the wood, it was a meditation. Each joint I fit together perfectly was a small piece of order I was imposing on a chaotic world. I knew the silence wouldn't last. Their panic was a coiled spring, and was about to snap. It happened on Wednesday evening. I was in the kitchen, washing my hands at the sink, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. My phone buzzed on the counter, a frantic, insistent vibration. It was Leo. I dried my hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and answered. "You have to stop this," he said, his voice a raw, desperate whisper. There was no greeting, no preamble. "Dad, please, you have to call them off." "There's nothing to call off, Leo," I replied, my voice even. "It's a court hearing. A judge has some questions for you." "Questions? Dad, this isn't questions. This is a demolition. Ms. Albright's report, they're accusing us of fraud. They're threatening to freeze our assets. The IPO is dead. Our investors are calling, asking questions we can't answer. You're destroying everything." His voice cracked on the last word, the sound of a man watching his glass castle crumble into sand. "I'm not destroying anything, son. I'm just looking at the books of a company I own 40% of. The company you built with my money." "It was seed money," he shot back, his desperation turning to anger. "A gift. You said it yourself, it was an investment." "An investment is supposed to have a return, Leo. So far, all I've gotten is an invoice for your honeymoon." I heard a sharp, furious sound, and then Chloe's voice was on the line, sharp and brittle as shattered glass. "You sanctimonious old fool. You think this is about a stupid contract from a decade ago? This is about jealousy. You couldn't stand that Leo built something bigger than you ever could in your dusty, pathetic workshop." "Hello, Chloe," I said calmly. "I see you'll also be testifying on the 12th. "You listen to me?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "We have the best corporate lawyers in the city. They will bury you in motions. They will tie you up in court for the next 10 years until you've sold this worthless house piece by piece, just to pay your legal fees. We will bankrupt you. You will have nothing left. Do you understand me? Nothing." "The truth doesn't cost anything, Chloe," I said, and the simplicity of the statement seemed to enrage her more than any insult could have. "The truth," she shrieked with laughter, a horrible grating sound. "The truth is you're a relic who doesn't understand how the world works. This is business. Money moves. Things get written off. Everyone does it. You're just too small and insignificant to understand the game." "Then I suppose you can explain the rules of the game to the judge," I said. "I'll be sure to listen closely." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I just pressed the button and placed it back on the counter. The sun had set, and the kitchen was now bathed in the cool, gray light of dusk. The pencil marks on the doorframe were barely visible in the gloom, ghosts of a past that felt a million miles away. The next evening they came to the house. I saw the headlights of their Maserati slice through the darkness of my quiet street, before the car pulled into my driveway, its engine a low, aggressive growl that sounded alien here. I was sitting in Sarah's leather armchair, reading a book under the warm glow of a floor lamp. I didn't get up. I just watched as their silhouettes appeared at the glass panel of my front door. They didn't knock. Leo used the key he'd had since he was a teenager. The sound of it turning in the lock felt like a violation. He pushed the door open, with Chloe right behind him. They looked exhausted, their expensive clothes rumpled, their faces pale and drawn under my porch light. They stood in the entryway looking at me as if I were a stranger. "Dad," Leo began, his voice strained. "We need to talk. No lawyers, just us." I placed a bookmark in my book and set it down beside me. "There is no us anymore, Leo. You dissolved that partnership yourself. You should go." "Please," he begged, taking a step into the living room. "I'll pay you back. The 40%. I'll have our lawyers draw up a settlement. We'll give you $1 million. Just sign it away. Make this stop." Chloe scoffed from the doorway, crossing her arms. "Don't beg him, Leo. He doesn't deserve it." She looked around my living room, her eyes filled with a disgust she didn't bother to hide. $1 million, and you can keep all this sentimental junk," she sneered, waving a dismissive hand at the room, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, at Sarah's chair. That's when I finally stood up. I wasn't angry, I was just done. "This junk is my life," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's the life my wife and I built. It's the life that paid for your degree. It's the life that funded your company. You didn't just try to take my money, you tried to take this. You tried to erase it. You tried to erase me." I looked directly at my son. $1 million doesn't fix that. Nothing does. Leo just stared at me, his face collapsing as he finally understood. He had no more moves to make. He had no leverage. He had nothing left to offer that I wanted. Chloe grabbed his arm, her face a mask of cold fury. "Fine," she spat. "Let him have his precious memories. We'll see how warm they keep him when he's old and alone and has nothing else." She pulled a stunned Leo out the door behind her. I stood there in the silence, listening to their car engine roar to life and then fade into the distance. I walked to the door, locked it, and drew the deadbolt. The sound of the bolt sliding home was solid and final. I went back to the armchair, but I didn't pick up my book. I just sat in the quiet, in the warm lamplight, feeling the worn leather beneath my hands. The house was no longer filled with ghosts. It was filled with me, and I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom was colder than my workshop on a winter morning. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the suffocating silence, the polished wood that absorbed all sound, and the sterile, impartial air of justice. I sat beside David Chen at a long table, my hands resting on my knees. I had worn my best suit, the dark navy one I'd bought for Sarah's funeral, and it felt stiff and foreign on my shoulders. Across the aisle, Leo and Chloe sat with a team of 3 lawyers who looked as sleek and expensive as their clients. Cars. Leo was trying to project an aura of calm confidence, but his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. Chloe was a statue of defiance, her chin held high, but her eyes darted nervously towards the judge's empty bench. They looked at me once, a shared glance of pure contempt, and then looked away, as if I were a piece of evidence they'd rather not acknowledge. They still believed this was a game they could win. When Judge Miller entered, a stern woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, the room fell into an even deeper silence. The proceedings began, and Mr. Chen rose to speak. His voice was calm, methodical, a surgeon laying out his tools. He didn't speak of betrayal or broken hearts. He spoke of contracts, of capital investments, and of fiduciary duties. He presented the signed partnership agreement from 2012, its image projected onto a large screen for the entire court to see. My signature was there, and so was Leo's, a youthful, optimistic scrawl. "Mr. Peterson Sr. is not just the defendant's father," Chen stated simply. "He is a 40% equity partner in Innovate Software, LLC. I saw Leo's lead attorney lean over and whisper something to him. Leo just shook his head, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Then came the forensic accountant's report. Ms. Albright's meticulous work was laid bare, line by damning line. A new slide appeared on the screen, A summary of personal expenses disguised as corporate costs. The $75,000 down payment on their condo, labeled office expansion. The $3,850 monthly lease payments for a Porsche and a Maserati, labeled company vehicles. And then, Mr. Chen clicked to the final slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was the wedding invoice they had sent me for $82, $457.19. On the right were the corresponding corporate credit card statements, totaling over $114,000 for the same wedding, all categorized as a corporate retreat and shareholder event. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. I watched Chloe's face. The defiant mask was gone, replaced by a pale, waxy shock. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. She finally understood. This wasn't about a family squabble. This was a criminal case in the making. Judge Miller leaned forward, her eyes fixed on my son. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Mr. Peterson," she said, addressing Leo, "your own records state this was a shareholder event. As your father is the only other shareholder, can you explain to this court why he was not only not in attendance, but was, in fact, invoiced for an event the company paid for?" Leo stood up, his expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him. He stammered, his business school jargon failing him. "Your Honor, it was a strategic networking function designed to leverage brand synergy with my wife's family's contacts." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. "So you are telling me under oath that charging a $12,000 wedding gown from Chantel's bridal boutique to the company was a strategic business decision?" The color drained completely from Leo's face. He looked at his lawyers, who stared stonily ahead, offering no help. He looked at Chloe, whose face was a mask of horror. Finally, his eyes found mine across the courtroom. In them, I saw no anger, no defiance. I saw only the terrified panic of a little boy who had been caught. A boy who had broken something priceless and had no idea how to fix it. He started, but his voice was gone. He sank back into his chair, a broken man. Chloe shot to her feet, her voice a shrill cry. "This is his fault. The old man. He's trying to ruin us." "Sit down, Mrs. Peterson," the judge commanded, her voice like the crack of a whip. Chloe's lawyer gently but firmly pulled her back into her seat. The judge's gaze was glacial. "Let the record show that the court sees sufficient evidence of shareholder oppression, breach of fiduciary duty, and what appears to be willful, systematic corporate fraud. I am granting Mr. Peterson's motion in its entirety. I am appointing an independent receiver, effective immediately, to take full control of Innovate Software's finances. Furthermore, I am ordering a full court-supervised valuation of the company for the purposes of a mandatory buyout of Mr. Peterson Sr.'s 40% share." She paused, letting the weight of her words land. "And I am strongly advising both of you to retain criminal counsel. This court's findings will be forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service and the District Attorney's Office by the end of the day." She banged the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room, an echo that signaled the end of their world. It was over. I stood up slowly, my legs a little unsteady. I smoothed the front of my old suit. I didn't look at them again. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the cold courtroom with Mr. Chen, leaving the wreckage of their beautiful, hollow life behind me. As the heavy doors closed, I stepped out into the bright, clear light of the afternoon sun. Walking out of that courthouse felt like surfacing after holding my breath for a very long time. The city air, usually thick with exhaust fumes, tasted clean and fresh. I drove home not with the hollow ache of betrayal in my chest, but with a quiet sense of stillness. When I stepped through my front door, the house felt different. The silence that had once been a heavy, suffocating blanket of loneliness now felt like peace. The weight was gone. The ghosts of what I had lost were finally at rest, replaced by the solid, reassuring presence of what I had reclaimed. Myself. The legal process unfolded with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a machine. The court-appointed receiver's final valuation placed Innovate Software, LLC, at a worth of $12.5 million. After Ms. Albright meticulously deducted every dollar of fraudulent spending directly from Leo and Chloe's 60% share, my 40% stake was calculated. A wire transfer for $5,023,800 appeared in my bank account 3 months later. I never spoke to Leo or Chloe again. I heard through Mr. Chen that they were facing a federal investigation from the IRS and that the district attorney was considering charges for corporate fraud. Their glass castle had shattered, and they were left to pick through the shards. I felt no joy in their ruin, only a profound sense of consequence. They had written the invoice, and a debt like that is always paid, one way or another. That evening, I brewed a pot of coffee and carried a steaming mug into the living room. I didn't turn on the television or the radio. I just sat down in Sarah's old leather armchair. For years, I had sat in this chair to feel closer to her, to cling to a memory. But now, as I sank into the worn, familiar leather, it felt different. It was no longer her chair. It was my chair. It was a throne of survival, a symbol of a quiet man who refused to be erased. The faint scent of lavender I used to desperately search for was gone. In its place was the clean, honest smell of cedar from my workshop clinging to my clothes, and the rich aroma of black coffee. It was the scent of my own life. I spent some of the money. I found another 1969 Ford Mustang online, this one a deep Highland green. I paid cash for it. Driving it felt like reclaiming a piece of my own history I had willingly sacrificed. The rest of the money, the vast majority of it, I used to start the Sarah Peterson Foundation, a nonprofit that provides scholarships and tools to young men and women entering the skilled trades. I wanted to invest in people who build real, tangible things with their hands. I wanted to build a legacy of substance, not of brand synergy. Sometimes, I stand in the kitchen and look at the pencil marks on the doorframe. They don't sting anymore. They are just marks on a wall, the story of a boy I once knew. Chloe had called my life sentimental junk. But as I sit here in my peaceful house, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creak of the floorboards, I know the truth. They were the ones who were empty. They had built a life that was nothing more than a showroom, a performance for an audience that never really cared. My life is this house. It's the grain of the wood under my hands. It's the dignity I refused to sell. And that is an asset that can never be liquidated. In the end, it was never about the money. My son and his wife saw my life in terms of assets to be liquidated. A house, a partnership, a father's love. They saw my quiet world of sawdust and memories and mistook it for a weak one. They thought I was a relic from a past they could simply write off, like a bad business expense. What they never understood is that the strongest foundations aren't built on spreadsheets and stock options, but on promises kept and sacrifices made in silence. They knew the price of a Hawaiian wedding down to the last cent, but they never learned the value of a father's legacy. My story is a hard one, but its lesson is simple. Never let anyone, not even your own blood, make you feel small enough to be erased. Your dignity is the one thing they can't send you an invoice for. It's the home you build inside yourself, and it's yours to protect, board by board, nail by nail. It's the one investment that always pays off. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.